How does the Lord lead us? God assures us that when thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned. Isaiah 43 and verse 2. During our life at one time or another, we all have to go through the fire and the flood. Perhaps some of you are in it right now. But God has a reason. He has a purpose for every one of them. Let's look at 5 of those reasons. First of all, God leads us through the fire and the flood to strengthen our faith. Faith is all important. It's the door to salvation. We're saved by faith in the Savior, nothing more and nothing less. Romans 4 verse 5. Faith is so important that we cannot please God if we do not have that faith in Him. Hebrews 11 and verse 6. Thus we start our Christian faith. So the floods and the fires teach us to trust, to grow in faith. And Job said that because of his faith in his trials, he would be like pure gold. Job 13 verse 10, Isaiah 58 verse 11, Hebrews 12 and verse 2. And then God leads us through the fire and the flood to test our obedience. Look at Daniel. Pagan King Darius decreed that if anyone prayed to anyone excepting him, he would be cast into a den of lions. Daniel openly defied the king, and he prayed to God, and he was cast into the den of lions. Daniel obeyed God even if it meant death. Makes me think of our brothers and sisters in the persecuted church today. And oh yes, the ordeal on Mount Moriah, Genesis 22 verse 2. Talk about fires and floods. Abraham went through it all, but he was obedient. St. Paul stood before King Agrippa and he declared, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, even though it eventually cost him his life. Matthew 4, 19 and 20, Acts 26 and verse 19, Ephesians 5 and verse 8. So then God leads us. He leads us through the fire and the flood to teach us patience. Are you ever impatient? Don't ask me that question. We live in a society that is constantly on the go, and a fast go at that. And where are we going? And what do we do when we get there? St. Paul tells us to live our life with patience and not to get in a dither over anything, Romans 12 verse 1. The psalmist told us 3,000 years ago, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, He shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Psalm 27 verse 14. Maybe you're in the middle of the mess so that God can teach you patience. 2 Peter 1 verse 6, Psalm 46 verse 10, Psalm 103 verse 13. And then God leads us through the fire and the flood to keep us humble. When things fall apart, when the flood overwhelms us, we quickly learn that we are not as great and mighty as we had supposed. It's easy to become proud, so God sends the fire and the flood to bring us to our senses, to settle us down, to make us humble so He can use us. Proverbs 16, verse 18, and James 4, verse 6. Search the Bible. You'll never find a single place where God used a proud person. Thank God He humbles us. Psalm 90 verse 12. And then God leads us also through the fire and the flood to increase our love for Him. Peter went through the fire and the flood. It was his own making, but it was real. And out of that bitter experience, Jesus asked him 3 times if he loved him. Peter's love was growing. Our love can become lukewarm, in a marriage or with the Lord. That was God's complaint about the church of Laodicea, Revelation 3, verse 15. And don't forget Job, who not only went through the fire and the flood, but death and destruction and all of it all. But it was a deepening love for God. God may let him die, but Job is going to love him. Job 13, verse 15. 1 Peter 5, verse 7. Are you willing to be led? I pray to God that all of us will obey God.